Welcome, class. We wanted to demonstrate our presentation through a podcast, something casual that we could just have a conversation about. So today we are going to take you through some bewildering studies and data sets that will leave you wondering why more people are not talking about what seems to be a systematic cover-up by the U.S. military. I have all my teammates sitting right next to me in the same room, and we're ready to share information. And it may be triggering for victims of sexual assault or members of the U.S. military. But that being said, we still need to talk about these cases, such as Lavinia Johnson, Tina Priest, Vanessa Guillen, and Kyle Antonelli, because they highlight a major problem in the U.S. military. That is a lack of accurate protection, prosecution, and representation in sexual assault and domestic homicide cases. Not only are these cases very rarely prosecuted, but the U.S. military does not provide comprehensive data on these crimes, making research on this topic very difficult. To be clear, we had to be very careful when thinking about how to test a hypothesis about a cover-up. It is very difficult to measure a cover-up because that really requires the ability to measure someone or some organization's intentions. The absence of data in our case is not our proof, but rather the cases studies of real people and real photos of women beaten, burned, and shot, cases that are not being properly prosecuted by the U.S. military courts. In this set of studies, our team had to have some form of empirical knowledge and testimony. Although the last year the Pentagon annually reported was 2018, it showed an increase in report rates, which can be misleading when data shows that also fewer soldiers face criminal prosecution. U.S. lawmakers have routinely asked the Pentagon leaders to task something to examine and improve the climate within the male-dominant military. But no progress has been made in our recent examples, even for both genders. We do not want our listeners to think that because we chose to focus on women in this hypothesis and research, that this problem does not happen to men. Therefore, the hypothesis that we chose is if the individuals that are assaulting women in the U.S. military receive a swift and known punishment, then the number of assaults would decrease. Our research going forward then looked into the depth and standard use of punishment and prosecutions on cases reported. We did look at the hypothesis of the U.S. military attempting to cover up female soldiers' murders and sexual assaults by claiming they attempted to commit suicide. However, that proved to not work out, considering the lack of data. So we went with our dependent variable being the number of assaults against women in the military, and our independent variable being the punishment that would be brought against offenders. In this podcast, we will each take turns describing parts of our research, just the main parts. We will have JJ focus on the previous studies done. Joby and Wes will talk about all the data that we collected and criminal cases. Plus, Summer will close with our final thoughts and conclusions. I hope you guys enjoy and really take this research seriously as we did. And just because we want to have a casual conversation about it does not mean that this topic is not important and it seriously needs to be talked about. So I will now turn it to JJ and he will talk about some previous studies that were done.
Hello all. So we first heard about this problem involving mysterious deaths, assault cases, and violence towards men and women, but more specifically focusing on women in the military, from a podcast Crime Junkie called Conspiracy, Women in the U.S. Military. I specifically want to talk about convictions, along with some unfortunate circumstances where people came forward and the effects following. Before talking about convictions and such, I want to get it out there that in 2014, the military rates were 50% higher among active duty women and over 100% higher among men. Then in the reserves, which is just something to keep in mind before talking about the next few points. Now, talking about conviction rates, it is something that's very interesting and alarming. In fact, actual conviction rates of sexual violence in the military have dropped from previous years. In 2016, of cases where the military could act, only 13% were prosecuted and just 4% of offenders were convicted of a sex offense. These sets of data have come from the National Security Research Division, which is known very well for conducting research and analysis for the government. Now, talking about actions taken when people do come forward is something that seems to be taken lightly by the military based on our research. A young woman in the military came forward and she attempted to report that she was assaulted, but instead of helping her, the man who she went to help for threatened to out her based on her sexual orientation. Later on, that same man, who did this, got a promotion and retired with full benefits, and the young woman had to be moved to another base. This goes to show that no one even considered helping her out, and there wasn't even an attempt to make things fair. On another circumstance, a woman was assaulted, and after the fact she had very bad panic attacks, and even tried taking her life. The base she was stationed at heard all of this, and instead of doing anything about what had taken place, they treated her even worse than before, telling her she always had to be watched and couldn't be alone or trusted, along with doing jobs that were not necessary. Both stories were women who came forward on the web, and Women's Republic wanted this to be known. And the point of bringing these two circumstances up is that the people who did this weren't even penalized in the slightest bit, and it goes to make you question how many times has this happened and how much will it continue to happen. And throughout this research, we couldn't locate any other researchers that are trying to study or have previously studied the material that we are covering. So now I'm going to pass this over to Joby.
Good morning, everyone. Focusing on the statistics, the stats on rape for the U.S. civilian population include 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced some form of physical violence by their partner. 1 in 7 women and 1 in 25 men have been injured by their partner. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men have had severe partner abuse. 1 in 10 women have been raped, and there is no data to report for the number of men. On average, there are more than 20,000 phone calls placed to the domestic violence hotlines each day on a national level. 34% of people by their partner or abused by their partner receive medical care. 1 in 5 women and 1 in 71 men have been raped. Information found at ncadv.org. When looking at the statistics of military versus civilian cases, there are 18,900 service members sexually assaulted or raped and 433,648 Americans that were age 12 or older that have experienced sexual assault. Information found at rainn.org. Statistics for military prosecution rates are more than 6,200 sexual assaults reported made by U.S. service members in the year 2020. Only 50, which is 0.8%, ended in sex offense convictions. Information found at protectourdefenders.com. Statistics for combat versus non-combat deaths are between 2006 and 2020. About 3,969 service members have died in conditions that are not related to overseas contingency operations. To put that into perspective, that is about 918 non-war related deaths each year. About 4,602 military members have died, assuming since 2006, in overseas operations or combat conditions. Information found at sgp.pass.org. Next up is Wes.
Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to get into 4 particular cases related to sexual assault within the military. First, I want to introduce Lavina Johnson, a former U.S. military officer. On July 19, 2005, Lavina was found in her tent suffering from a gunshot wound to the head. It was also found that Lavina had also been raped. Her nose had been broken and she suffered a black eye, along with her teeth being knocked loose, and on her genitals she had suffered acid burns. Blood was also found leading away from her tent. The Department of Defense ruled her death a suicide despite the following findings of the autopsy report and the photographs of the scene. Her autopsy report completely contradicted a suicide but showed strong signs of rape and murder. The second victim, Tina Priest. On March 1st, 2006, she died from combat related injury. Her death was ruled as a suicide by the Army. Her untimely death occurred 2 weeks after she had reported that she had been raped. Tina's parents believe that she was raped and then murdered. Around that time, 41 servicewomen died from non-combat related injuries while serving in Iraq. with 23 of them being labeled a homicide, suicide, or an unknown cause of death. Lavina Johnson also falls right into this category. To the next victim, Vanessa Guillen. The murder of the Army specialist exposed a pattern of abuse and violence within the military. Vanessa had told her family that she had been sexually harassed by several of her fellow soldiers before she went missing. On April 22nd, 2020, Vanessa was killed by a fellow officer by the name of Aaron David Robinson inside the Army base's armory. In our final case, a Navy sailor by the name of Kyle Antonaki was found hanging. This came around the time when Kyle was helping with a rape investigation. He received backlash from other Marines for his involvement in cooperation because they put a fellow member in jail. He brought new information to light about that night. He had also slept with the alleged victim. This made the woman's friends start to threaten him. The Navy was non-helpful in getting to the bottom of what happened to Kyle. Kyle's parents learned information from the coroner. Kyle suffered hemorrhaging around the face, a broken nose, and other injuries. According to the coroner, this was not consistent with a typical hanging. All signs point to apparent cover-ups or just lack of interest in helping victims in these situations. Now, final thoughts with Summer.
When it comes to talking about sensitive topics such as assault, society usually gets quiet and avoids the subject. We think that these topics are the ones that should be spoke up about to prevent any more incidents from happening. Bringing awareness about military women who are being assaulted or have been assaulted should be considered a top issue in the world. The fact that this topic is hardly being addressed blows our minds, considering how many cases there are today that we have found. To address our hypotheses, if the individuals that are assaulting women in the military receive swift and known punishment, then the number of assaults would decrease. The lack of prosecution rates for sex offenders is surprisingly low. You would think that as many people as there are in the world that say they want to stop sexual assault, the number of offenders being charged would be higher. Knowing that there is not much being done for prosecuting these offenders makes me ask how many of us want to stop these types of people. This topic is very hard to find data on just to be able to discuss it. It was not easy for our group to do because the military is very quiet. We could not find the data to directly answer or prove our hypothesis because the majority of these cases are not being prosecuted correctly. Therefore, we cannot make a definite connection of the rate of prosecution decreasing the number of assaults because the assault rates go up every year compared to the rates of how many get prosecuted. What are some better ways that researchers can use to collect data about the assault against military women? In order to gain more data, there will have to be more willing men and women to come forward and talk about what they have gone through. Hopefully, after you have heard all of our information today, you will be able to help us spread awareness about this topic.
All right, thank you, Summer. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to all of us speak. I know it probably seems awkward. All of us are probably standing in front of the classroom right now, staring at you. I don't know what's going on at this point. We're all sitting in my living room right now. But we just wanted to say thank you for listening, and maybe we'll make more podcasts in the future together about this topic. Have a great day, you guys. Bye.
Bye.